Rosewood Park, England, 1818. The clock in the drawing room had been silent for 2 years, yet Lillian still looked at it whenever footsteps echoed down the hall, as if time itself might start again if she wished hard enough. Today, the footsteps were heavier, formal, accompanied by her Uncle Reginald's irritated voice from the foyer. A duke. Here. Without warning. There was a thread of panic beneath his tone, and Lillian felt her stomach twist. Dukes did not visit small country baronies without reason. She smoothed the skirt of her pale blue muslin gown, simple, but perfectly cut, and held her breath as the door opened. The man who entered filled the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes the color of amber in candlelight. For a heartbeat, Lillian's world tilted. She knew that face. Every line, every shadow. James. But then he spoke, and the voice was the same, and not the same. Lady Lillian Farnsworth? He didn't smile. He didn't move closer. He only held a small wooden box in his hands, looking at her with something that wasn't indifference, but exhaustion. Or guilt. Lillian blinked, forcing her reason to steady the wild rhythm of her heart. James was at war. James wrote to her every week. James had promised to come back, but this man was not James. "I'm Gabriel Cavendish," he said quietly, his voice low, almost solemn. Duke of Worthing. Brother to Captain James Cavendish. Brother. The word fell into the stillness like a stone breaking the surface of a calm lake, and before he said another word, she already knew. She knew by the way he held the box, with reverence and distance. She knew by the silence that filled the room thick as grief. And she knew by his eyes, so much like James's, shadowed with pity, with something close to sorrow. "I regret to inform you," Gabriel said at last, every word sounding heavier than the one before, "that my brother fell in battle. 3 weeks ago." The clock did not move. Neither did the world. Anne heard the words, but she didn't feel them. It was as if her body and mind had parted ways, as if she were watching herself from outside the moment, a lady in a simple gown standing before a duke, while the world quietly fell apart around her. Fell in battle. 3 weeks ago. James had been dead for 3 weeks, and she had kept waiting and writing letters that would never reach him, guarding hopes that had already turned to ashes. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Not there. Not in front of a man who wore James's face, but none of his light. Gabriel Cavendish watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Sorrow, perhaps. Or simply duty fulfilled. Dukes did not travel to small country baronies to deliver death in person. There was something more. "You didn't have to come all this way, Your Grace," she murmured, forcing her voice to stay steady. "A letter would have been enough." He set the small wooden box on the polished mahogany table. That's when she saw it. The blue ribbon binding the letters together. The same ribbon she had sent to James with her first note, as a symbol. A promise. Now it looked like nothing more than a faded strip of cloth holding words no one else would ever read. Gabriel stepped back, as if preparing to leave, then hesitated. His amber eyes fixed on her, steady and unsettling. "I read the letters," he said quietly, without pretense. All of them. The world tilted. Lillian felt the blood drain from her face. He had read them. Every word. Every plea. Every confession she had written about her uncle. About Percival. About the fear that kept her awake night after night. He knew everything. "You had no right," she began, but her voice broke. "No," Gabriel agreed, his gaze unwavering. "I didn't, but I read them anyway. And now I know my brother promised to marry you. That he meant to bring you to safety. And I know." He paused, as if the next words cost him, "that your time is running out." Lillian's fists tightened at her sides as she fought the knot in her throat. He knew too much. Saw too much. And the way he looked at her, with that strange mix of regret and resolve, frightened her more than she wanted to admit. "There's nothing to be done," she said firmly, lifting her chin with the quiet dignity her mother had taught her. "My uncle is my guardian. He inherited the barony when my father died. What he decides for my future, I will accept." Gabriel studied her for a long moment, and Lillian had the uneasy feeling that he saw far more than she wished to reveal. "And if there were another way?" he asked softly. Her heart missed a beat. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our upcoming stories. And tell me in the comments, which city and country are you watching from? I love knowing how far our stories travel. Now, keep watching this emotional story of Lillian and Gabriel. Chapter 1. The Proposal That Should Never Have Been. The question hung in the air, heavy as lead. Another way. Lillian looked at Gabriel Cavendish and searched his face for any trace of falsehood, some hint that this was merely polite sympathy from a nobleman doing his duty. But he stood there, unmoving before the rain-fogged window, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on her as if waiting for an answer she didn't have. "What kind of way?" Lillian asked at last, cautious. Her voice came softer than she intended, almost a whisper. Gabriel hesitated. For the first time since he had entered the room, he seemed uncertain, as though the words he carried were stones in his mouth. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture so like James's that it made her chest tighten. But James did it when he laughed. Gabriel did it when he carried the weight of the world. "I could honor my brother's promise," he said finally, plain and direct. "By marrying you." The world stopped. Lillian blinked, certain she'd misheard. But Gabriel didn't move, didn't smile. His expression remained composed, nothing but cold determination behind it. He wasn't mocking her. He wasn't being cruel. He was offering. "You can't be serious, Your Grace," she murmured, stepping back. The room suddenly felt smaller, warmer, closer. "We are practically strangers." "I know enough," Gabriel replied, his voice steady. "I know my brother loved you. I know he swore to protect you from the marriage your uncle intends. And I know he is no longer here to keep that promise." He paused, something flickering across his face. Guilt, perhaps. Or regret. "But I am." Lillian's knees weakened. She gripped the edge of the chair, fingers clutching the fabric as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. None of this made sense. Even as a baron's daughter, she was bound to her uncle's will. Lord Reginald, who had inherited the barony and decided that the best use for his orphaned niece was to merge her dowry with his estate by marrying her to his son. Why would a duke care about any of it? "I don't need charity," she said, lifting her chin though her voice trembled. "Or sacrifice." "It isn't charity," Gabriel answered, taking a step toward her. "It's—" He searched for the right word. "Duty, duty, of course. Not love, not desire. Just duty." She was supposed to be grateful, to fall to her knees and thank heaven for such an unexpected rescue. But all she felt was a deep, hollow ache, as if something inside her had cracked beyond repair. "And what does Your Grace gain from it?" she asked quietly. "Other than a wife you never chose, and a marriage you never wanted." Gabriel regarded her for a long moment, and Lillian had the uneasy sense that he was trying to read something in her. Or in himself. "Peace of conscience," he said at last, his voice low. "And the knowledge that my brother did not die for nothing." Rain tapped against the window now, steady and unrelenting. Lillian looked at the wooden box on the table, at the blue ribbon that no longer shone. James was gone. Her future lay in the hands of an uncle who saw her as a bargaining piece, and a cousin who looked at her with ownership in his eyes. And standing before her was a man offering salvation. Cold, dutiful salvation. Stripped of love and warmth and anything that felt alive. "I need time to think," she murmured, turning away. "There isn't time," Gabriel said gently, though his tone left no room for argument. "Your uncle has already set the wedding date, hasn't he?" "How long?" Lillian closed her eyes. 2 weeks. Only 2. "Then you have until tomorrow," Gabriel said. "After that, the law of guardianship will keep me from intervening." And with those words, he turned and left the room, leaving Lillian alone with the sound of the rain, the weight of unread letters, and the impossible choice that now belonged to her. Chapter 2. The Duke's Burden. Gabriel closed the door of the drawing room and stopped in the dim hallway, leaning his back against the cold wood. He drew in a long breath, trying to steady the rhythm of his heart. What had he just done? He had offered marriage to a woman he barely knew, a woman who had loved his brother. A woman who, every time she looked at him, saw only the shadow of James. He shut his eyes, as if he could drive away the image of her. Those green eyes filled with restrained pain, the proud lift of her chin as the world collapsed around her. Lillian Farnsworth was beautiful, yes, but it wasn't her beauty that unsettled him. It was her strength, her quiet dignity, the way she refused to bend, even as everything conspired to break her. James always did have excellent taste, even in love. Gabriel descended the steps of the old manor and climbed into his carriage, giving the order to depart. Rain fell harder now, tapping against the roof in relentless rhythm. He pulled off his gloves slowly, his fingers trembling, and stared down at his hands, the same hands that had held Lillian's letters for hours, reading every word, every plea, every confession of love she had written to his brother. He should never have read them. He knew that. But when he found that bundle tied with the blue ribbon among James's belongings, he couldn't resist. The first letter had been polite, a lady's formal gratitude after a chance meeting. The second, warmer. The third carried the quiet tremor of a woman falling in love. And the last ones, God, the last ones, were silent cries for help, dressed in careful words. James, please come back soon. My uncle insists on the marriage to Percival. I don't know how much longer I can delay it. Please, come for me. I'm afraid of what he might do. Promise me you haven't forgotten. Promise me you'll still come. Gabriel's fists tightened. James had promised, and then he died before he could keep that promise. Now Gabriel was here, as he had always been, cleaning up what was left behind, carrying the burden, doing what had to be done. Duty. It was always duty. But seeing her today, looking into those green eyes that shimmered with unshed tears, he had felt something that wasn't duty at all. He had felt anger. Anger at the uncle who kept her trapped. Anger at the cousin who wanted to claim her. Anger at James for making promises he couldn't keep. And anger at himself for feeling jealous of a dead man. Because as he read those letters one by one, he began to know her. And the woman he met through her words, written by candlelight in the loneliness of her nights, was someone he wished he had known first. Before James. Before the promises. Before everything. The carriage stopped outside the small inn where he was staying. Gabriel stepped out into the rain and went straight to his room, asking for a glass of brandy. When it arrived, he drank it in one go, the burn tracing down his throat but failing to warm the chill inside. Him. Tomorrow she would give her answer, and Gabriel didn't. No, which terrified him more, that she might refuse and he'd have to abandon her to her fate. Or that she might accept, and he'd spend the rest of his life with a woman who would always see another man when she looked at him. He closed his eyes, and once again he saw her. The way her fingers had trembled as they touched the blue ribbon. The way her voice broke when she said she needed no charity. Proud, strong, afraid, and somehow exactly the kind of woman Gabriel had spent his life searching for, yet never found, because every woman had wanted the Duke of Worthing. Never the man beneath the title. Lillian didn't want the Duke. She could barely look at him, and perhaps that was why he couldn't stop thinking about her. Chapter 3. The Choice Before the Storm. Lillian did not sleep that night. She sat by her bedroom window, watching the rain fade into mist and the moon slip out from behind the clouds, while Gabriel Cavendish's words echoed in her mind like a distant bell. What if there were another way? She pressed the blue ribbon between her fingers, the same one she had untied from James's letters before locking them away in her desk drawer. She couldn't bring herself to look at them. Not yet. Every word she had written to James now felt like a betrayal of what she was about to do. To marry his brother. A man with the same face, the same voice, but none of the memories she cherished. Dawn came slowly, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. With Mary's help, her brown-eyed maid who had served her since childhood, Lillian dressed in silence. Mary watched her with quiet concern, but asked no questions. She knew when silence was kinder than comfort. Lillian chose a gown of ivory muslin, simple but dignified, and pinned her brown hair into a low chignon. She looked into the mirror and saw the reflection of a woman she barely recognized. At 22, she should have been planning dinners and dances as a married lady, not escaping one prison only to run into another. Her eyes were shadowed, her face pale, but her chin remained lifted. Her mother had always said, "A Lady Farnsworth never bows, no matter the weight she carries." Descending the stairs, she heard raised voices coming from the dining room. Aunt Victoria's sharp tone carried through the hall, brittle with irritation. Lillian drew a breath and stepped inside. "Good morning, Aunt." Lady Victoria turned at once, her eyes as cold and cutting as blades. "Good morning?" she repeated, her voice dripping with irony. "A duke visits this house yesterday, requests to see you alone, spends more than half an hour with you behind closed doors. And all you have to say is good morning?" Lillian's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression calm. She had expected this moment. "His Grace came to deliver news of Captain James Cavendish," she said carefully, choosing each word. "He fell in battle." Her aunt paused, not in sorrow, but in calculation. "And why, pray, would a duke come personally to deliver such news?" she asked, suspicious. "You barely knew the captain. It was a single meeting, years ago." A single meeting. If only she knew of the letters, of the promises, of the love that had bloomed in ink and paper. "Captain Cavendish mentioned my name in his final letters to his brother," Lillian lied, half truth, half defense. "The Duke thought it proper to tell me himself." Lady Victoria narrowed her eyes, but before she could press further, heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor. Lord Reginald entered, his face flushed, his eyes bloodshot. Too much brandy the night before. Yet there was something more in his expression. Something that made Lillian's stomach twist. "Lillian," he said gruffly, "the butler informs me that the Duke of Worthing will return this morning, at 9 o'clock sharp." He crossed his arms, suspicion tightening his features. "What business could a duke possibly have with you?" Lillian lifted her chin. There was no more time for hesitation. "He made me an offer yesterday. I asked for time to consider." The silence that followed was heavy as stone. "What sort of offer?" her aunt asked slowly. Before Lillian could answer, the front bell rang. 9 o'clock. On the dot, Gabriel had arrived. "I will answer his grace myself," Lillian said, and left the room before either of them could stop her. She walked down the corridor on trembling legs, hearing the hurried steps of her aunt and uncle behind her, curious, furious, confused. When the butler opened the door to the drawing room, Gabriel was already there, standing by the window, exactly as he had the day before. A living echo, as though time itself had frozen and begun again in the same breath. "Your Grace," she said, her voice steady. Gabriel turned. He wore a dark coat, perfectly tailored, his hair slicked back from his angular face. Those amber eyes studied her with quiet intensity. There was something different about him today. Something taut, vulnerable, as if her answer mattered more than he cared to admit. "Lady Lillian," he said, inclining his head. Then his gaze shifted past her, to where Lord Reginald and Lady Victoria hovered in the doorway. His expression hardened. Lord Reginald. Lady Victoria. Her uncle stepped forward, stiff and wary. "Your Grace honors us with his presence," he said formally. "But I would like to understand what draws such attention to my niece." Gabriel did not look away from Lillian. He simply extended his hand, slowly, deliberately, a silent invitation. And in that gesture, Lillian understood. He was offering her the choice. He would not decide for her. He was waiting for her to choose. Here, in front of everyone. She drew a breath, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear herself speak. "I accept," she said clearly. "I accept your proposal, Your Grace." The world stopped again. Her aunt made a strangled sound. Her uncle's mouth opened, but no words came out. And Gabriel stepped forward and took her hand in his, firm and warm and sure. "Then it is done," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Lady Lillian Farnsworth will be my wife. We'll marry as soon as a special license can be obtained." "This is madness," Lord Reginald burst out, finding his voice at last. "She is already promised to my son." Gabriel turned to him, and there was ice in those amber eyes. "There is no lawful betrothal, Lord Reginald, only intention. And Lady Lillian, as a free woman of age, has every right to choose." He paused, dangerous calm in his tone. "Unless you wish to challenge the laws of England before a peer of the realm?" Her uncle paled. Her aunt looked as if she might faint. Gabriel's fingers tightened around Lillian's once, firm, grounding. She felt his pulse against her palm, quick, strong, alive. "We must leave for London," he said quietly but with resolve. Today. Lillian's heart raced. To leave Rosewood Park. To leave everything she had ever known. Forever. But when she looked at her uncle, his face red with rage, his fists clenched, she knew there was no other way. If she stayed, she would be forced to marry Percival. If she left, "I'll be ready," she said firmly. Gabriel nodded, and in his eyes she saw something, gratitude, perhaps, or relief. "Then I'll return at 11, he said, releasing her hand, though the warmth of his touch lingered. "Bring only what you need. Everything else can be arranged in London." Before her uncle could speak again, Gabriel bowed briefly, turned, and left the room with steady, decisive steps. Lillian stood frozen, trembling, while Aunt Victoria glared, and Lord Reginald shouted about scandal and disgrace. But all Lillian could think was this: today, London, freedom, or perhaps only another prison, a gilded one, but a prison all the same. Chapter 4. The Weight of a Promise. Gabriel climbed into the carriage and knocked twice on the roof, the signal to depart at once. He needed time to prepare everything before returning for Lillian. When the carriage stopped in front of the inn, he stepped down quickly and went straight upstairs. Harrison, his valet, was folding a shirt with military precision when Gabriel entered. "Harrison," he said without preamble. "Change of plans. We leave for London today, within 2 hours." The middle-aged man, gray-haired and impeccably composed, didn't flinch. Experienced valets rarely did. "Very well, Your Grace. I'll see to it at once." Harrison moved efficiently, arranging Gabriel's belongings with the same calm order that had always governed his life. Gabriel walked to the window and looked out at the narrow street below. His pocket watch read 10:15. In less than an hour, he would be back at Rosewood Park. "Harrison," he said after a moment, "when you've finished packing, go down and speak with the innkeeper. Have provisions prepared for a long journey? Water, bread, fruit, whatever is fresh. Yes, Your Grace." While the man worked in silence, Gabriel sat near the cold hearth and reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He drew out the last letter his brother had ever written to him, the one that had arrived barely 2 weeks before the news of his death. The paper was creased and yellowed from being unfolded too many times. Gabriel opened it gently, as though handling something sacred. "Gabriel, I hope the dukedom isn't weighing too heavily upon you. I know it was never what you wanted, but I also know you are the only one who can carry it with honor. As for me, I've found something worth more than glory or war. I've found a reason to return. I can't say more now, but when I come back, you'll understand. Take care, brother. And if anything happens to me, forgive me for living while you had to bear the weight alone. Your brother James." Gabriel closed his eyes, the words cutting deep. "Forgive me for living while you had to bear the weight alone." James had always known. He had always seen what Gabriel hid from everyone else, that the title was a prison, that honor was a burden, that every fulfilled duty was another quiet death. James had lived, laughed, loved, fought, and died free. And Gabriel? Gabriel had simply endured, as a duke, as an heir, as a shadow of a man. But now, holding that letter, about to collect the woman his brother had loved, Gabriel wondered if perhaps, just perhaps, it was time for him to live too. Not the way James had. Not with that effortless charm and bright laughter that filled every room. But in another way. Quieter. Deeper. With Lillian. He folded the letter again and slipped it back into his pocket, close to his heart. "Forgive me, James," he thought. "Not for existing, but for what I am about to take." "The bags are ready, Your Grace," said Harrison, breaking the silence. "Will you need anything else?" Gabriel hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box of dark blue velvet. "This stays with me," he said, returning it carefully to its place. "No, that will be all, Harrison. You may go." The valet bowed and left, carrying 2 suitcases with him. Gabriel remained alone in the quiet room. He stood and crossed to the side table where a half-empty bottle of whiskey waited beside 2 crystal glasses. He poured himself a measure and drank it in one motion. The liquid burned down his throat, but the warmth never reached his chest. The cold stayed. The cold that came from within. The guilt he wore like a second skin. He looked at the empty glass in his hand and thought of the letters he had returned to Lillian, the words she had written for another man, words he had stolen with his eyes. He had read them all, as an intruder. A thief of moments that had never belonged to him, he set the glass back down. No more. He needed a clear mind. Downstairs, Harrison was already speaking with the innkeeper, handing over coins and final instructions. Moments later, Gabriel stepped into the carriage again, now loaded with their luggage. Harrison climbed up beside the driver. The wheels began to turn. As they rode toward Rosewood Park, Gabriel reached into his pocket and opened the small velvet box. Inside lay his mother's ring, an emerald encircled by diamonds. Delicate yet commanding, he stared at the green stone, thinking inevitably of Lillian Fernsworth's eyes. It wasn't love. It would not be. But it was a beginning of something he could not yet name. Duty, perhaps. Honor. Or simply the belief that James would have done the same for him if their fates were reversed. Gabriel closed the box and slipped it back into his coat. The carriage slowed. The gates of Rosewood Park came into view. He drew a long breath, straightened his coat, and prepared to step out. It was time to keep his brother's promise. Chapter 5. The Day She Chose Freedom. 2 hours. Lillian had only 2 hours to undo an entire life. She ran upstairs the moment Gabriel left, with Mary following close behind. The maid shut the door and leaned against it, her eyes wide. "My lady, London? Today?" "Today," Lillian confirmed, already pulling open the wardrobe doors. "And you're coming with me, Mary." "I can't travel alone with him." Mary nodded, pale but determined. "Then we'd better hurry." They worked in frantic silence. Lillian chose only what was essential. 3 dresses, a few undergarments, the shawl that had belonged to her mother, and the silver hairbrush she had received on her 18th birthday. Mary packed everything neatly into 2 small trunks, while Lillian stood still for a moment, her eyes drifting around the room where she had grown up. The faded wallpaper. The bed where she had wept through countless nights after her parents' deaths. The window where, for 3 long years, she had waited for James to return. She crossed to the writing desk and opened the drawer. The letters were still there. Lillian took them in trembling hands and held them to her chest. She couldn't leave them behind. Couldn't leave him behind, even though that was exactly what she was about to do. "Take them," Mary said softly. "Take whatever part of the past you can carry. The rest will stay here." Lillian nodded and placed the letters at the bottom of one trunk, wrapped carefully in a silk scarf. Then she unclasped the locket around her neck, the one she had worn since she was 16. Inside was a tiny painted portrait of her mother. She opened it, gazed at the delicate face, and closed her eyes. "Forgive me, Mother," she thought. "Forgive me for not being stronger. For running instead of fighting. But this wasn't running, was it? It was survival. It was a choice. The only path left between prisons, and at least this one carried the promise of respect, if not love." A violent knock startled her. Lord Reginald's voice thundered through the door. "Lillian! Open this door at once!" Mary looked frightened. Lillian drew a deep breath, tucked the locket back beneath her collar, and opened the door just enough to face her uncle's flushed, angry face. "Have you lost your senses?" he barked. "A duke? You barely know him." "I know enough," she answered firmly. "And he offered me a choice, something you never have." "Choice?" Lord Reginald let out a bitter laugh. "You think he's marrying you out of love? Out of kindness? Dukas don't do charity, you foolish girl. He wants something. And when he learns you have nothing to offer, no fortune, no estate worth his name, he'll discard you." The words should have cut deep. They should have made her doubt. But Lillian raised her chin and met his eyes without flinching. Perhaps, she said. But at least I won't be forced to marry a man who looks at me as though I were property to be owned. Her uncle's face went pale, then hardened. You'll regret this, Lillian. And when you do, don't come crawling back. These doors will be closed to you forever. Then let them be, she said, and shut the door in his face. Her knees trembled, but she didn't fall. Mary's hand steadied her. It's ready, my lady, she said quietly. Everything's packed. Lillian looked at the 2 small trunks. 22 years of life reduced to 2 cases. It was sad. It was liberating. Together, they descended the staircase, each carrying a trunk. Aunt Victoria stood in the entrance hall, lips pressed into a thin, unforgiving line. I hope you know what you're doing, she said coldly. Society doesn't forgive women who run away with men, even if they're dukes. I'm not running, Lillian replied. I'm choosing. Before her aunt could answer, the sound of carriage wheels on cobblestone echoed outside. 11 o'clock. Gabriel had returned. Lillian walked toward the door, Mary beside her. The butler opened it, and there he was, Gabriel Cavendish, Duke of Worthing, standing by the carriage, his posture erect, his face composed. When his eyes met hers, something passed between them. Not love, not promise, but understanding. 2 strangers bound by circumstance, trying to make the best of an impossible fate. He descended the steps and extended his hand. Are you ready, Lady Lillian? Lillian turned for one last look. At Rosewood Park, at the gardens where she had played as a child, at the windows where she had once waited for James. Then she looked forward, at the man who bore her lost love's face, but not his heart. I am, she said, and placed her hand in his. And without another word, Lillian Fernsworth left behind everything she had ever known and set out toward the unknown with a man who was still, in every way, a stranger. Chapter 6. The First Crack in the Ice. Gabriel helped Lillian into the carriage, his hand holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. She was trembling, only slightly, but he felt it. When their eyes met, there was fear there. Not of him exactly, but of everything that lay ahead. Of the unknown itself. He released her hand and helped Mary the maid climb in after her. The young woman sat beside Lillian, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes lowered. Gabriel entered last and took the seat opposite them. The carriage jolted as the horses began to move. Silence settled between them. Gabriel looked out the window, watching Rosewood Park shrink into the distance until it vanished behind the trees. When he turned his gaze inward again, Lillian was doing the same. Looking back. Her face was pale, lips pressed tight. She didn't cry, but there was something worse than tears in her expression. Resignation. He wanted to say something. Anything. But what words could possibly fit this moment? Thank you for agreeing to marry a stranger. I'm sorry the man you loved is dead. So he said nothing. The first 2 hours passed like that, only the rhythm of wheels on stone and the soft creak of leather seats between them. Eventually, Mary fell asleep, her head resting on Lillian's shoulder, worn out from the morning's chaos. And then, at last, Lillian spoke. Your Grace, may I ask you something? Gabriel turned to her, surprised. It was the first time she had spoken since they'd left. Of course, he said. She hesitated, her gloved fingers tracing the hem of her sleeve. Why are you doing this? Really? Gabriel could have given her the easy answer. Duty, honor, the memory of his brother. But something in the way she looked at him, direct, honest, unflinching, demanded more. Because my brother made you a promise, he said slowly, and he died before he could keep it. Someone had to. And that someone had to be you? Lillian asked softly. Surely a duke has more pressing duties than rescuing his brother's secret fiancé. Gabriel held her gaze. There was nothing more pressing than this. She blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. Then she looked away, a faint flush rising on her cheeks. Thank you, she murmured. Even if this is only duty for you, I'm grateful. It isn't only duty, he said, before he could stop himself. Lillian looked back at him, puzzled. Then what is it? He didn't know, not yet. So he simply said, it's what must be done. I am a duke. My life has always been about doing what must be done. She nodded slowly. The silence returned, but it felt different now. Lighter somehow, less suffocating. As if something unspoken had passed between them. Gabriel turned his gaze back to the window. But his attention stayed on her, on the way she held Mary gently so the girl wouldn't wake, on the slender line of her neck, on the faint trace of lavender that clung to her, mixed with something sweeter. Her voice, when she spoke, carried a quiet strength beneath its softness. She wasn't what he had expected. The letters had painted her as romantic, delicate, fragile. But the woman before him had a spine of steel. She was brave. Gabriel forced his eyes away. He couldn't begin to see her like that. He couldn't start noticing things he had no right to notice. She had belonged to James. She always would. But his gaze, traitorous, disobedient, found her again. And this time she was looking back. Their eyes met and held. For 1, 2, 3 seconds, something shifted. Something small, invisible but inevitable. The first crack in solid ice. Lillian looked away first, color rising to her cheeks. Gabriel turned back to the window, his heart beating faster than it should. The afternoon dragged on. Mary awoke, and they stopped briefly in a small village to change horses and fill their canteens with fresh water. Gabriel stepped down to speak with Harrison while the women stayed inside. When he returned, Lillian was gazing out the window, lost in thought. Her brown hair shimmered in the sunlight. Her small hands clutched her mother's shawl like an anchor. Her green eyes seemed to hold quiet storms. "Stop it," he ordered himself. Stop looking, stop noticing, but it was too late. He was noticing. And the more he noticed, the harder it became to remember why he shouldn't. By the time the sun began to set, they reached the first inn. A sturdy stone building, neat and well kept. Gabriel stepped out first and helped Lillian down. When their fingers touched again, she didn't tremble this time. She just looked at him briefly and murmured a quiet thank you before stepping inside. Harrison had already arranged the rooms, 2, on separate floors. Gabriel accompanied Lillian and Mary to the corridor where they would stay and stopped outside her door. "Rest," he said. "We leave early tomorrow. We should reach London by evening." Lillian nodded but didn't open the door right away. She lingered, as though searching for the right words. Gabriel waited, patient, Your Grace. She began hesitantly. "When we arrive in London, how long until—" She didn't finish the question, but he understood. "The license takes a few days to process," he replied evenly. "Perhaps 2 weeks. Until then, you'll stay comfortably at Cavendish House. Your rooms will be private. No one will disturb you." Something in her face eased. Relief, perhaps. "Thank you for your consideration." "It isn't consideration," Gabriel said quietly. "It's respect. You deserve at least that." Lillian looked at him then. Truly looked, as if trying to see beneath the surface. And Gabriel let her. He let her see the exhaustion, the guilt, the steady resolve. He let her understand that he wasn't her enemy. Just a man trying to do what was right. "Good night, Lady Lillian," he said at last, bowing his head. "Good night, Your Grace." But as he began to turn away, she spoke again. "Gabriel?" He stopped. It was the first time she had said his name. "Not Your Grace, just Gabriel." He turned slowly. "Yes?" Lillian's hand rested on the doorknob, her green eyes fixed on him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not leaving me behind." Something tightened in his chest. He nodded, unable to trust his voice, and turned down the corridor. When he reached his own room and closed the door behind him, he leaned against it and shut his eyes. Gabriel. She had said his name. Not the title. Not the mask. The name. And somehow that changed everything. Chapter 7. The Test of London. Lillian awoke to the soft glow of dawn filtering through the curtains of the inn. For a moment, a fragile, confusing moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then memory rushed in. The journey, Gabriel, London, and the way she had spoken his name the night before. Without thought. Without permission. Gabriel. She sat up, covering her face with her hands. What had possessed her to do that? It was an intimacy she had no right to. A slip of the tongue that felt far too familiar. And yet, he hadn't been offended. He hadn't corrected her. He had simply looked at her, with those amber eyes, and something had stirred quietly inside her chest. Something she couldn't quite name. Mary entered soon after, bringing warm water and helping her dress in a moss-green traveling gown. Simple but elegant. While Mary pinned her hair, Lillian studied her reflection in the fogged mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. A woman who had left everything behind and now traveled toward the unknown, beside a man she had met only 2 days ago. They went down to breakfast. Gabriel was already there, speaking quietly with Harrison. When he saw her, he rose at once, formality slipping over him like armor. Lady Lillian. Mary. I trust you both slept well. Yes. Thank you, Lillian replied. Taking her seat, they ate in polite silence, fresh bread, marmalade, and strong tea. Lillian noticed small details. Gabriel drank his tea unsweetened, sliced his bread with precise, almost military movements, and his fingers, long and steady, gripped the cup with effortless control. Little things. Things James had never shown her, because James had been a memory, a handful of letters, a dream dressed as love. Gabriel was real, solid, present. After breakfast, the journey resumed. This time, the silence inside the carriage wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, expectant, as if both waited for the other to speak first. Mary soon dozed off again, lulled by the gentle motion of the wheels. Lady Lillian, Gabriel said at last, when we arrive in London, society will ask questions. Many questions. Lillian turned to him. What kind of questions? How we met. Why the marriage so suddenly? He paused. We need a story. Something believable. She hadn't thought of that. Of course there would be gossip. London thrived on it. What do you suggest? He thought for a moment. We could say that we met through my brother. That he introduced us before leaving for the war. That we exchanged respectful correspondence, and after his death I realized, he hesitated, that I held a deep regard for you. Enough to offer marriage. It was simple, plausible, close enough to truth that it wasn't a lie. And my uncle? Lillian asked quietly. He'll tell everyone I was taken by force. Leave your uncle to me, Gabriel said, his voice hardening. A baron does not challenge a duke publicly, not without consequences. There was something protective in his tone, something that made her heartbeat quicken. She nodded. The matter was settled. Hours passed. The landscape changed. Fields gave way to houses, then to crowds, noise, life. And finally, there it was. London. It rose on the horizon like a living thing. Vast, gray, smoky, and magnificent. Lillian pressed her face to the window, wide-eyed. She had never seen anything like it. Rosewood Park had been quiet, secluded. London roared. It's much larger than I imagined, she whispered. Gabriel smiled. Just slightly, but enough to soften his entire face. London tends to have that effect. The carriage turned onto a wide, tree-lined street. Mayfair, she realized, and stopped before an imposing mansion of pale stone and towering windows. Worthing House. Gabriel helped her down. She looked up at the grand facade, the marble steps gleaming under the midday light. Intimidating. Overwhelming. She straightened her shoulders and drew a steady breath. Your Grace has arrived, cried a gray-haired butler, hurrying down the steps, followed by a neat row of servants. Welcome home, sir. And this must be Lady Lillian Fernsworth, Gabriel said formally. My fiancé. She will be residing here until the wedding. You will treat her with the respect due to the future Duchess of Worthing. Bows. Murmurs of yes, your Grace, and welcome. My lady, filled the air. But before they could step inside, a cold, sharp voice cut through the commotion. Fiancé? How fascinating that I, your aunt, must learn this only upon the arrival of your carriage. Lillian looked up. A tall woman stood at the top of the staircase. Silver hair tightly coiled. Black gown severe and flawless. Eyes the same golden amber as Gabriel's. Lady Constance. Tia Constance, Gabriel said, tension coiling through his tone. I didn't expect you here. Clearly, she replied, descending with deliberate steps. I came to inspect the estate as I do every 3 months. Imagine my surprise to find you returning from a mysterious trip. With a bride. She turned her gaze on Lillian. Cold, dissecting. "And what is your name, girl?" "Lady Lillian Fernsworth, madam." "Fernsworth," Lady Constance repeated slowly, tasting the syllables. "Rosewood Park, is it not?" "I believe that estate passed to your uncle after your father's death. A modest barony, if I recall." Gabriel took a step forward, but Lillian's hand touched his arm. Gentle, deliberate. "Let me handle this." "You're correct, Lady Constance," Lillian said, her voice calm but firm. "Rosewood Park is modest, yet respectable. My father, the late Baron Fernsworth, served the crown with distinction for 30 years. I intend to honor his name just as I will honor the Cavendish name." Lady Constance's brow arched. Slightly, she hadn't expected composure. "And how does a baron's daughter from the countryside come to know my nephew, the Duke of Worthing? A trap." Gabriel opened his mouth, but Lillian was faster. "Through Captain James Cavendish, madam," she replied steadily. "We met briefly 3 years ago when he visited acquaintances near my father's estate. We corresponded while he served abroad. After his death, His Grace was kind enough to inform me personally. Seeing my difficult circumstances, he offered the protection of marriage." "Difficult circumstances," Lady Constance repeated, her tone dripping with irony. "How very convenient." Lillian didn't flinch. "My uncle intended to marry me to his son," she said quietly. "A man of violent temper and questionable character. Captain Cavendish had promised to help me. After he died, His Grace chose to honor that promise. I accepted, because the alternative was a forced marriage that would have destroyed me. And because I trust that His Grace is a man of honor." "How fortunate you are," Lady Constance said dryly. "To escape one undesirable match only to fall directly into a dukedom." Gabriel's jaw tightened. But Lillian stepped forward, her voice composed yet edged with steel. "With respect, Lady Constance, allow me to clarify something." She stood tall, chin lifted, every inch the lady her mother had raised her to be. "Though Rosewood Park may be humble beside Worthing House, I was raised as a lady. I was taught etiquette, protocol, property management, and the duties that come with a title. My mother, the late Lady Margaret Thornbury, daughter of Viscount Thornbury, ensured I was prepared for every responsibility such a position entails." She paused, her gaze steady. "I did not come here out of ambition or opportunism. I came because His Grace offered me a choice when no one else would. And I swear to you, madam, I will never bring shame upon the Cavendish name. I will do everything in my power to be worthy of it." The silence that followed was heavy. Lady Constance studied her for a long, unreadable moment. And then something shifted. Not approval, not quite, but the faintest glimmer of respect. "Your mother was Lady Margaret Thornbury?" she asked at last. "The late Viscount's daughter?" "Yes, madam." "I knew your mother," Lady Constance said, her voice softening. "A woman of impeccable grace and reputation. If she raised you, then perhaps you do understand what it means to be a duchess." Lillian inclined her head. "I will do my utmost to live up to that expectation." Lady Constance's gaze flicked between her nephew and Lillian, and in that moment, she saw it. That look. She had seen it before, in her brother's eyes when he looked at his wife. Admiration. Fascination. The dangerous beginnings of something deeper. "Very well," she said finally. "At least you haven't chosen a fool, Gabriel." She turned toward the door but paused. "Lady Lillian, when the ceremony is set, I expect to be informed. I remain, after all, the only close relative this family has. It would be most improper not to attend." And with that, as close to a blessing as one could ever receive from Lady Constance, she swept into Worthing House, the servants hurrying after her. Lillian exhaled, her composure finally cracking. Her knees trembled, but she held her ground. Then she felt Gabriel's hand at her waist. Warm, steady, protective in a way that sent her pulse racing. "You—" His voice was low, rough, full of something he didn't yet understand. "You faced that dragon beautifully," Lillian met his gaze. And in those amber eyes, she saw something new. Not duty. Not obligation. Admiration. Wonder. Desire. "I couldn't let her think I was weak," she said, still breathless. "Or make you look small before your family?" "Small?" he said, laughing softly, incredulous. "Lady Lillian, You just faced the most terrifying woman in all of London. And won. He stepped closer, his tone gentler now. Come, you must be exhausted from the journey. Let me show you your chambers. Chapter 8. Between Shadow and Light. Lillian walked to the window and looked out. London unfurled before her, vast, unknowable, thick with 1,000 paths she had never imagined were hers to tread. Somewhere within this great house, Gabriel was moving through its corridors as if he were part of its architecture. The man who had saved her. The man who wore James's face and voice yet was not James. She had to remember that. She had to separate them, in her mind, in her heart. Because when she looked at Gabriel, she didn't see only a twin. She saw something different. The way he moved, controlled, measured, as though every gesture had been weighed before it was made. The way he spoke, not with James's easy brightness, but with gravity, with care. The solitude he wore like a second skin. James had been light. Gabriel was shadow. And Lillian did not yet know what to do with that truth. She opened her trunk and lifted out the bundle of letters. Sitting at the edge of the bed, she loosened the blue ribbon with trembling fingers. The first letter she unfolded was 2 years old. My dearest Lillian, the days here are long and hard, but the thought of you makes them lighter. I am counting the days until we can be together again. Lillian closed her eyes. James had written that. James had promised to return. James had loved her. She knew it, felt it. But James was dead. And however it tore at her, however the guilt pressed hot against her ribs, the truth was simple. She could not live the rest of her life loving a ghost. It was not betrayal to go on. It was survival. She folded the letter and tucked it back beneath the ribbon. She would not destroy her memories, but she would not drown in them. James would have wanted her to live, truly live. And perhaps with Gabriel, perhaps there was a chance to build something else. Not love at first sight, not a lightning bolt passion, but something steady, real, possible. She glanced at the door, imagining Gabriel somewhere in this house. She wondered if he too was thinking, if he too was asking himself questions he could not answer, if he too felt the strange weight of being caught between duty and something other. I must come to know him, she thought. Not James's brother, not the Duke, the man beneath the title. She had to know Gabriel. Down in the study, Gabriel poured a measure of brandy and sank into the leather chair by the fire. The house had gone quiet. Lillian was settled in her rooms. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. So why was there no peace in him? He could still see the scene on the staircase. Lillian standing before Lady Constance, spine straight, chin lifted, voice firm yet courteous. I will never bring shame upon the Cavendish name. I will do everything in my power to be worthy of it. The words kept tolling through his mind like a bell that would not fall silent. She had not wavered. She had not asked him to shield her. She had not bowed to the woman who made seasoned lords go pale. She had simply met the dragon head-on, with dignity, with strength, with a courage he had not expected to find, and when she laid her fingers lightly on his arm, something shifted inside him. For the first time in his life, Gabriel did not need to be the shield. She was not fragile, not a damsel to be tucked behind him. She was like an equal, a partner, someone who might stand at his side rather than in his shadow. He drew James's last letter from his pocket, the one he carried always, whether as penance or promise he no longer knew. Forgive me for living while you had to bear the weight alone. James had always understood. He had known that Gabriel felt confined, to a title won by accident of birth, to duties that never ended, to expectations that demanded the perfect duke, marry well, beget heirs, preserve the line, honor the name. James, by contrast, had been free. Free to fight, free to love, free to live. Now James was gone. And Gabriel remained, bound this time to a promise, bound to a woman he had not chosen, who now depended upon him, bound to the task of turning a marriage of convenience into something workable, at least. He needed heirs. The dukedom demanded it. Society demanded it. And Lillian, whether she wished it or not, would be their mother. She would be the Duchess. She would be his in some fashion. He drank the brandy in a single swallow, the burn cutting down his throat. But there was something else he could no longer deny. When he looked at Lillian, at those green eyes studying him with equal parts fear and curiosity, at the mouth that pressed tight when she forced herself to be brave, at the small hands that trembled and yet refused to yield, he did not see only duty. He saw possibility, and today, upon the stairs, when she faced Lady Constance with contained steel and unshakable grace, Gabriel felt something he had not expected to feel. Pride, not the cold pride of a duke admiring a suitable match, but the warm pride of a man who had been struck by a woman's courage, by her poise, by the way she had unsettled him without trying, the possibility that this marriage might not be only a prison, the possibility that she might one day see him, not as James's echo, not as a guardian, but as Gabriel. The possibility that, in time, something might grow between them that was more than resignation. Dangerous thoughts. Dangerous to want what had not been offered. Dangerous to imagine she might one day look at him and recognize what no one else ever had, the man behind the title. A man who wanted to be free as well. A man who wanted to be chosen, not merely accepted out of need. He set the empty glass down and watched the fire move. In a few days he would be a married man. In a few days, Lillian would wear his ring, bear his name, someday carry his children. And he? He would continue to be what he had always been, the Duke who fulfilled his duties. But perhaps, just perhaps, this time he might be something more. If she lets me, he thought. If she sees me. 3 days later, the morning of the wedding rose clear and luminous. Mary dressed Lillian in ivory silk stitched with narrow threads of silver, elegant without ostentation. Her hair was drawn into a low chignon, tiny pearls threaded through the coils. When she looked into the mirror, she saw a bride. And this time, fear was not the only thing she felt. Hope bloomed quietly beneath it. The ceremony would be held in the chapel at Worthing House. Small, intimate. Lady Constance, Mrs. Thornton, Harrison, Mary, and a handful of trusted servants as witnesses. Lillian descended the staircase alone. No father to give her away, no family to stand beside her. But when she stepped into the chapel and saw Gabriel waiting at the altar, dressed in immaculate black, his eyes brightening as he saw her, she understood she was not alone. Not anymore, she went to him. He extended his hand. She took it. And she did not tremble. The Reverend began. The words were old, familiar. 11 to cherish. In sickness and in health? Till death do you part. When it came time for the vows, Gabriel held both her hands and spoke, steady and clear. I, Gabriel Cavendish, choose you, Lillian Farnsworth. I promise to respect you, to protect you, and to honor you, not only from duty, but because you are brave and strong and worthy of everything I can offer. I choose you, today and always. Lillian's eyes stung, but she smiled. I, Lillian Farnsworth, choose you, Gabriel Cavendish. I promise to respect you, to stand beside you, and to honor you, because you gave me a choice when no one else would. Because you see me. I choose you, today and always. Gabriel drew a small box of dark blue velvet from his pocket, opened it, and lifted out the ring, an emerald circled with diamonds. He slid it onto her finger with reverence. Green as your eyes, he murmured, a fleeting smile at his mouth. You may kiss the bride? Said the Reverend. Gabriel hesitated, just for a breath. No word had been spoken between them to invite or forbid it, and yet the hush in the chapel seemed to ask for something more. He drew her in with careful hands and kissed her. At first, the touch was gentle, almost uncertain. Then it deepened, warm and unguarded, dense with everything that had not yet been said. When they parted at last, the air itself felt changed. Lillian stood there, silent and beautiful, a flush rising from her throat to her cheeks. And then they noticed Lady Constance at a distance, still, watchful. For the briefest moment, her lips curved into something that might, almost, have been called approval. Chapter 9. The Night of Choice. Night had fallen over Worthing House. The few guests had gone. Lady Constance's parting words lingered in Lillian's mind. Take care of him, child. He needs it more than he knows. And now Lillian stood in the Duchess's chamber, no longer a guest room, but hers. The room that had once belonged to Gabriel's mother, and now to her. Mary had helped her change into a simple white silk nightgown and left with a quiet, encouraging smile. Now, Lillian sat at the edge of the vast bed, staring at the polished mahogany door on the side wall, the door that connected her room to his. She knew what it meant. In noble households, husbands and wives often had adjoining chambers. And she knew that when a husband wished, he would come, knock, or simply open the door. It was his right. It was duty, and yet the thought didn't frighten her as it should have. And that in itself said something. A soft knock broke the silence. Her heart leapt. She rose, smoothing her gown with unsteady hands. "Come in," she said, her voice quieter than intended. The door opened slowly. Gabriel stood there, wearing only a white shirt and dark trousers, his hair slightly tousled. Without the armor of his coat or cravat, he looked startlingly human. When his eyes found hers, he stopped at the threshold, as if waiting for permission to step further inside. "Lillian," he said softly, "may I come in? I'd like to speak with you." Speak. Not what she expected to hear. She nodded, and he entered, closing the door gently, but not locking it. He walked to the armchair near the hearth instead of approaching the bed and gestured to the one opposite. "Will you sit with me?" he asked quietly. Lillian blinked, confused but obeyed. She sat across from him, hands folded in her lap. The distance between them felt deliberate, respectful, safe. And suddenly she realized he hadn't come to claim anything. He'd come to talk. Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she had rarely seen in him. "I need to tell you something," he began, eyes steady on hers. "And I need you to understand that I expect nothing in return. I only need to be honest." Lillian's pulse quickened. "I'm listening." He drew a deep breath. "When I came to fetch you from Rosewood Park, it was duty. Nothing more. I meant only to keep a promise to James, to do what was right." He paused. "But these past days, you've changed something in me, Lillian. The way you faced my aunt, the way you refused to bow or hide. You were simply yourself, strong, dignified, real." His voice dropped lower. "I'd be a fool not to admit that I may be falling in love with you. And I know that isn't fair because you loved my brother. You probably still do. I understand that. I respect that." Lillian parted her lips, but he raised a hand gently. "This marriage was meant to protect you," he continued. "You owe me nothing beyond respect and companionship. As for the rest," his gaze flickered toward the bed, "I will never ask for what you are not ready to give. Not ever." He leaned forward slightly. "When, and only when, you are ready, it will be your choice. Always yours." He hesitated, then added quietly, "All my life, every decision has been made for me. Where to serve, whom to marry, what to represent. Every path imposed. Perhaps that's why. All I want now is to give you what I was never given, the right to choose." He exhaled. "Until then, just let me be by your side. As your friend, if nothing more, silence." The fire crackled softly between them. Lillian looked at him, at the man who had just given her something no husband ever did. Freedom, time, choice. And suddenly, everything became clear. She thought of James, of that one day they'd shared, of the letters filled with promises and dreams. But that was all they had ever been, dreams. Words on paper. A love built on imagination, not on knowledge. She had never known how James took his tea, whether he snored, whether he woke from nightmares, whether he preferred silence or conversation. She had only known the light, the idea of freedom, the fantasy of love. Gabriel, though. Gabriel was real. She knew how he held a teacup, how he read late into the night, how he carried the weight of his title like invisible chains. She knew the way he looked at her, as if she were something more than duty. And right now, she knew he was offering her something rare and precious, respect. And that was what broke her. "Gabriel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "May I ask you something?" He nodded. "How many times did you see James and me together?" He frowned slightly, confused by the question. "None. You met him before I knew of your existence." "Exactly," she said, leaning forward. "I saw James once. A single day. A few hours. After that, only letters, promises. But I never really knew him. Not the way that matters. Not the way I... Her eyes filled with tears. Not the way I'm coming to know you. Gabriel went still. Lillian... James was light, she said, her voice steady now. He was freedom. A dream. But you... Her voice softened. You are real. You're here. You see me? You respect me. You give me choices. And in these days I've changed too. Because when I look at you, I don't see his brother anymore. I see you, Gabriel. The man who carries weight but never bends. The man who is kind without being weak. The man I want to know. Truly know. Gabriel rose slowly, as if afraid to shatter the moment. Are you certain of what you're saying? He asked, voice low and rough. Because I don't want this to come from gratitude or obligation. I don't want you to... It's not obligation, Lillian interrupted, standing too. It's choice. My choice. She stepped closer, closing the space between them. You gave me time. You gave me respect. You gave me freedom. And now I give you my answer. I don't want to wait. I don't want separate rooms. I don't want to pretend this is only convenience when I feel it could be more. Gabriel lifted his hand and touched her cheek, reverently, as if she were made of something breakable. Lillian, he murmured, are you sure? She placed her hand over his. I am, she said softly. I'm sure of you. Of us. And then she closed the distance. It was she who took his hands. She who kissed him. Gently at first, then deeper, with the unspoken confession, I choose you. Gabriel's arms went around her, drawing her close as if he feared she might vanish. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Show me, Lillian whispered. Show me it's real. Show me us. Gabriel lifted her easily into his arms and carried her to the bed. Careful, deliberate, as though the moment itself were sacred. He laid her down among the silk sheets and leaned over her. If at any moment you wish to stop, he began, but she was already shaking her head, already pulling him closer, already answering without words. I won't stop. I don't want to. And then there were no more words, only touch, only discovery. Hands tracing, learning, worshipping, kisses down her throat, across her shoulders. Breathless murmurs, shared heat. The quiet gasp as uncertainty became something deeper, fiercer, real. When at last they became one, when the first pain faded into a rhythm that felt like life itself, Lillian clung to him as to an anchor, and Gabriel whispered her name like a prayer, like a vow, like everything. And that night, beneath the silver spill of moonlight through the window, they became husband and wife in every sense, not from duty, not from expectation, but because they chose to. And when sleep finally took them, tangled together, they both knew they had found something unexpected, but real. Something worth every struggle it had taken to arrive here. True love. Morning came gently, the golden light spilling across the room. Lillian woke first and didn't move. She only watched him sleep beside her. His face was relaxed, his breathing slow, the weight of his burdens momentarily gone. He looked at peace, and she felt peace too. Quietly she rose, walking to the window. London stretched beyond the glass, alive and bright under the morning sun. Somewhere out there, a new life waited, one she would build. With him. She looked down at her left hand, at the emerald ring catching the light. Then she looked back at Gabriel, and smiled, small but true. Thank you, James, she thought, for teaching me how to dream. But now I'm awake. I'm alive. And I'm happy. Gabriel stirred, opening his eyes to find her framed against the sunlight. He reached out a hand toward her. Good morning, Lady Worthing, he said, his voice rough with sleep but full of warmth. Lillian returned to him, slipping back into his arms. Good morning, Lord Worthing. And there, in that golden London morning, with the past finally laid to rest and the future wide open before them, they understood that love doesn't always arrive as one expects, but it comes. And when it comes in its truest form, built on choice, respect, and courage, it is stronger than any dream.